Okay, welcome to the neighboring rights panel. If you're not here to hear us talk about neighboring rights, you're not in the right room. So my name is Bonilla. I run the technology team at SoundExchange. I'm the CTO. I'm actually covering for Angela Singh, who is our CFO and COO. She had a death in the family, so I had to step in, but happy to do that. I've been in the neighboring rights market for 21 years now. I'm getting old, in different capacities. But I've been living and breathing neighboring rights for a while on the data side, the business side, and the everything side. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for coming. And let's introduce the panel. Hunter.
Hey everyone, my name is Hunter Giles. I co-founded a company called Infinite Catalog. And we are a royalty accounting software and service company, which has an interesting relationship to neighboring rights. We don't go out and collect them for you, but once you do collect them, we help you combine all that data with your other royalty data, and that's a big part of the puzzle. So excited to talk about it more today.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Jodie Ferneyhough, president of CCS Rights Management, Day Tripper Music Publishing. We're an independent publishing and rights management company based in Toronto, Canada. The neighboring rights division was started when I started the company as a means to make sure that artists and independent labels and whatnot are collecting all of their money.
Hello, I'm Eric Veerman. I'm the managing director for peermusic neighboring rights. In the past, I was the international manager for the Dutch Neighboring Rights Society called SENA. I'm based in Amsterdam, but we have multiple offices around the world. We represent approximately 3,500 artists for the neighboring rights and around 400 independent labels. And in addition, we also work together with a number of neighboring rights societies to collect on their behalf internationally.
Thank you. So we met earlier and we were discussing how to break up the neighboring rights definition and make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about. So we decided to break it up in 3 segments. The first one is, what are neighboring rights? Second one is, how do they work? How can labels benefit from neighboring rights and start collecting neighboring rights? And then a third segment for more advanced view on how to maximize your collections and give you a few best practices, tips, and tricks. So starting by the definition, what are neighboring rights? I guess, Eric, you're probably the best position given how you cover the whole thing. What's your definition of neighboring rights?
So what's the most important part is that the neighboring rights is related to the recording. So not to the composition or the work, but it's specifically to the recording. And in general, of course, there are a few exceptions, but in general, throughout the world, the neighboring rights are collected by neighboring rights societies in each territory. And from what they collect, they pay through 50% of the royalties to the owner of the recording, which is often the label, but sometimes also the artists themselves. And the other 50% is assigned to all the performers that contributed on the recording. And these are usually featured performers and non-featured performers. Sorry.
Great.
I can explain a little bit more maybe. Because where neighboring rights come from is mainly from 4 different sources. The most important source in Europe and the rest of the world outside of the US is terrestrial radio and television broadcast. So if your song is being played there, you should receive neighboring rights. Then it's public performance. So music that's being played in bars, restaurants, or at the hairdresser is also being collected for. Then we also have digital broadcasting and satellite radio, which is the main part here in the United States. And there are also a number of territories where it comes from the private copy levy.
Thanks. So I've heard many people be very confused about whether neighboring rights is something that exists in the US or whether it's something that only exists overseas. And yes, the US is different, but Jodie, can you explain how is the US different when it comes to neighboring rights and what are people eligible to collect in the US versus overseas?
Right. So Eric's already sort of talked a little bit about that, really. So just a little bit more on what the neighboring right is. It's what it sounds like. It's the neighbor to the performing rights. So if you're getting money from ASCAP or BMI, this is the neighbor to that source of money. The United States does not have a neighboring rights regime. There is no money being paid from terrestrial radio. There is money being paid from digital, satellite, through resound. The world, most of the world does have a neighboring rights regime, including Canada. The United States decided not to sign on to the
The Rome Convention.
The Rome Convention many years ago, and they're one of two, I think, that are not part of the Rome Convention.
No, officially there are like, of course it's counting, but officially there are 96 countries that signed the Rome Convention.
That are, yes. So, not the United States. And that's changing. There was an agreement made a number of years ago called NAFTA, and then, as you are all aware, that it was renegotiated in the last 6 years or so. And when that agreement was done with Canada, it was agreed that Canada would now start paying American artists and labels, which is an exciting thing, except it's not going to happen for a long time because the radio broadcasters probably don't want to give up their money. But yeah, it's retroactive to 2020, and if it ever happens, there'll be money in Canada.
And to summarize it also, what I keep hearing is how, because in the US, AM, FM radios don't pay, other countries overseas don't pay American performers when their recordings are performed on AM, FM, and FM radio.
That's right.
Which is something that we've been trying to change for the last, I don't know how many years, but too many. But that is the core issue as to why the neighboring rights are different in the US. But yeah, so more neighboring rights, how would you, Hunter, what do you think are the main differences between accounting for neighboring right royalties versus other types of royalties so that people don't get too confused with all the different types of royalties that exist?
Yeah, so neighboring rights are a recorded side royalty, so the label is typically the one dealing with it, but neighboring rights are just one of many hundreds or even potentially thousands of different royalty streams for the recorded side. But what makes neighboring rights very interesting and kind of unique from a royalty accounting perspective is that they are, in many cases, pre-split at the layer of a SoundExchange or equivalent in other countries where the performers are already being remunerated by, in this case, SoundExchange directly, and the label is getting their share separately. And it is very rare for a label to be receiving a royalty that is, on behalf of a spin or a play or something that can usually be attributed to an artist and would then be fed back into a royalty statement. But in this case, they are pre-split. So a lot of labels struggle to figure out what to do with them. Like, should they, even bring them into the royalty accounting picture at all? Should the artist handle their side, or should they handle it for them? And those are they're equally valid. And we have some clients who, we have plenty of clients who just treat that as like that's our share of the money. We keep that bit, and the artist gets theirs, and it's already split, and that's the end of it. But we have other clients still who have a little bit more of a sort of DIY spirit, and they treat neighboring rights income identically to any income, where they say, yeah, it's been pre-split, but you know what? We got income we can attribute to this track or this artist, so we're just gonna filter that into the deal and split it again. If it's a 50-50 deal, we'll just split it one more time so that it effectively, the artist is getting 75% of it and the label 25%. And yeah, so that makes it a very unique situation in the royalty accounting sphere of things. That sometimes people do this, they sort this out in their contracts ahead of time. Very often they do not, and they have to kind of decide on the fly of like, what do we do with this money? And they ask us, and we say, we don't tell you what to do with that. And yeah, but it's an interesting one, and there's lots of different ways that it gets treated in different countries around the world, that if you're registering with unique societies around the world to collect that money, it can get even more complicated from there. But I think for now we're just going to keep it at just that base level.
Okay, so now that we've gotten the definition out of the way on what neighboring rights are, how do they work? Because at the end of the day, I'm assuming you guys are interested in understanding how to get your money. So what's the high-level overview on how can people in this audience understand how they work and what they need to do to start collecting neighboring rights? I guess, Eric, you want to cover that one?
Yeah, so for labels, so what's important to know is that in each country there's a neighboring rights society established, usually in the 90s, and they all have their own database structure and their own specific rules and obligations on how your track title or your data needs to be submitted to them. The problem is that they get their information from the broadcasting stations, from many different sources, and there's a lot of polluted data out there. This is one of the biggest issues and challenges for us in the neighboring rights industry. But what a label can do is you can become a member of your own society in your domestic territory, which in the US is obviously SoundExchange, and they can then make sure that your repertoire that you submit to them will be sent out throughout the world through their bilateral agreements. There are some pros and cons to that structure. I think it's sort of easy that you only have one entity that you're working with. A problem that we see is that because all these societies have different database structures, different ways of registering a recording, is that when a society such as SoundExchange, but it could also be PPL in the United Kingdom or GVL in Germany, if they send each other data, it doesn't automatically all match with each other. So there's a chance that there are tracks not being matched to the airplay and that the royalties eventually are not being paid out. Another option is that you will start registering your own catalog in each territory individually. This is a lot of work. Some labels specifically hire somebody to do that for them. In that case, you can make sure that your repertoire is ingested in each territory specifically to the rules that you need to do it in that territory. But it needs you need a lot of knowledge in order to do that. And the third option is that you work through a third party, a service provider like peermusic neighboring rights or Jodie's company, and they sort of take care of your data. You submit it to us in that case, and we will make sure that it gets registered in each territory, specifically the way it needs to be registered there. And those three options also depend, of course, is your repertoire receiving a lot of airplay outside of the United States? If like 99% of your airplay takes place in the United States, it might make sense to just remain a member of SoundExchange and let them handle the rest of the world. But if you have significant usage outside of the US, you might want to consider one of the other options.
Thank you. And you were talking about data. So what are the basics of what data do labels need to capture and send out in order to ensure that they can collect neighboring rights royalties across the world?
Yeah, so the most important elements of the data are like each society has, sometimes they have like 15 or even 20 different fields of data that you need to submit. But the basics are the name of the artist, the track title, the version, the ISRC code is super important. And the year of release is quite relevant as well.
I think it's like, if anybody's familiar with their PROs and what you have to submit, and with the way that things go, and I think you could probably talk better to this because you're looking at data all the time. The more data you can put, the more information you can give, the better. We are becoming a data-driven industry. So yes, all of those that he said, you know, ISR and ISWC codes, who's played on it, who's the producer. Sometimes there's producers are being paid for this. So it's vital that you're detailed and that you please spell your name right. Honest to God, I've seen people spell their names wrong so many times. It's really important.
Yeah, and good data in, good data out is a general rule of thumb, and it's good to fill in all the forms and get your metadata as clean as you should be as you can, and eat your vegetables. That's all very important and helpful. The reality on the other side of the coin is when you're getting reported to by a SoundExchange or if you're registering independently with different societies around the world. From a royalty accounting perspective, you're going to have to unify that data with lots of other data from your distributors and web stores and any other data source you got going on, direct deals with DSPs. And for us, it's kind of just another data source. It's yet another format that needs to be unified with all this other data. And in our experience, you can have the most perfect metadata in the world, and it gets sent out into the world and onto the platforms or through neighboring rights organizations. And when it comes back, there's almost invariably something's different, something's changed, or it just doesn't match what you put into other places. I've never really seen a catalog with like 100% perfect metadata across really more than like 2 data sources, and many of our labels have dozens or hundreds in some cases. So I wouldn't like, obviously it's more to just make sure that you're getting the right amount of money or getting as much money as you can that's rightfully yours or for your catalog. But on the other side, it's kind of just another data source that we're going to have to unite with everything else anyway. And the trick with it really just comes in with how you treat it contractually, like I was referring to earlier, where like, do you split this again, or do you let this be considered to be pre-split, and you don't have to like pay out the artist a share of it, which is very rare for any sort of like catalog related income. Yeah, but the data is, the data is the data. It's always going to be, a challenge to unite it across different formats. And the more rights societies you register independently, the bigger that challenge becomes. You have to weigh that pro and con against the additional income you'll get by registering directly and collecting directly and getting all those different kinds of data and formats of data versus going through a third-party company or a single company that's going to do all of that for you and unify it to some degree and then deliver it to you in a unified fashion. You can kind of think of it similarly to the difference between like going direct to every DSP and collecting data and royalties directly from every DSP in their own unique format. That's great, you're cutting out a middleman, but you're also creating a challenge with unifying all that data versus just like, oh, I have a distributor, they do that for me. The distributor unifies all the data from all the different DSPs and then delivers it to me in one format. So that's kind of the challenge. A lot of people don't think about that part of it when they're debating whether to like go direct or go through a third-party company. But there's no right or wrong answer. It's just pros and cons, and it's just something to think about when you are considering which path to take for your label.
So Eric touched on this when you said that year of production is a critical field. From a catalog management perspective, what data fields, what data elements are core and you wish you always had to be able to do a good job and collect neighboring rights? Are there specific fields that you say, I wish everybody always send me that to make my life easy?
For me?
Any of you?
I mean, the ISRC is the easiest win by far. And yeah, just trying to get those as clean across your catalog as you can. Like that's really the one to pay the most attention to. Like there's always going to be, I spelled the name wrong or the title wrong, or I used brackets instead of parentheses in in Bandcamp versus Spotify, and that's always going to happen. But if the ISRC is there, that's a very, very helpful thing. So that's the one to pay attention to if I had to pick one.
I would probably agree. and make sure that all the ISRCs for any given song, because it was released by different people or different formats, there might be a different ISRC, so make sure they're all listed.
Cool. So all in all, if it's a label starting from scratch, what are your recommendations on how to move and start collecting neighboring rights royalties? Eric.
Move out of the United States so that you can actually get them.
So I think because there's probably, it's very relevant here. So there's a big misconception in neighboring rights or in the United States about neighboring rights that they are not applicable for you because you are based in the US. I don't know if anybody heard of this, but I'm noticing it a lot when I'm talking with independent labels from the US. But this is actually not true. There are quite a number of territories in Europe that traditionally always have paid out for the US repertoire. In addition, there's been a court case 2 years ago for the European Court of Justice where it was actually brought up that it was discriminatory, that US performers and labels were not equally paid. And that case was won. And so in Europe, we do expect that things will change quite rapidly. I'm based in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, US repertoire was never qualifying for neighboring rights until 2 years ago. They adjusted their qualification criteria, and now all the airplay is qualifying just as much as any other territory's repertoire. So I think it's becoming more and more important also to be aware of this potential income stream for your label. And if you just start a label, make sure that you keep your data as clean as possible, especially what Hunter also mentioned. There's a lot of polluted data out there. The societies are getting that into their systems as well. So the whole industry is polluting each other's systems continuously. And it's something that is a problem. But we do see that there are some developments thanks to audio recognition, for example, that there's a bit more, like with fingerprinting technologies, is more and more becoming used in neighboring rights as well, which makes it a bit more accurate nowadays.
Okay, and for labels that are already collecting neighboring rights, what tips and tricks do you guys have for them so that they can maximize what they're collecting? Hunter or Jodie?
I don't have any, because likely you're probably just collecting from SoundExchange. I would think most of the American labels, because they probably don't have this information. Doing it yourself around the world independently he's not lying. It's really, really hard. Everybody's different, and so it's a lot of work. You know, I think what we've said up here about what you should be submitting, what you should have in there works. I think if you're predominantly getting only or making only money in America, Resound is the way, or SoundExchange Story is the way to go. And then from there, I would suggest, yeah, you go to a third party. Just because we've got those relationships around the world, we collect directly from around the world. We're able to collect all the money because the reciprocal agreement doesn't always collect all the bits and pieces of money. So you might be leaving money on the table. Yeah, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, and what's also relevant, if you look at the total neighboring rights global collections by all societies combined, including SoundExchange, it is approximately 2.6 billion US dollars per year. Of this 2.6 billion, I would say 85% comes from the top 10 or 12 territories. So those 10 or 12 territories are really very relevant to make sure that your repertoire is properly ingested. There's also like a long tail of territories where there's a lot of emerging markets. I'm seeing significant growth in Asian territories, in Latin American territories, where the total collections are relatively small, but where they are exponentially growing since a few years. And so I think it's better to be front-running that and make sure that your catalogs are in those societies' databases properly as well, than waiting until other people are claiming your stuff, because that's happening a lot in this industry. Digital distributors, some people out there with bad intentions are trying to find their ways through and claiming stuff that's remaining unclaimed around the world. And it's hundreds of millions of dollars per year. So it's really important that you properly protect what's yours.
Yeah, and after the collecting part is done, one tip that I always try to instill in our catalogs is some of them ask us, you know, okay, if this is already pre-split, like, do we even need to bring this into the royalty accounting picture? Because, you know, we're not going to pay through on it. Like, they already got their share. We're going to keep our share. Like, should we even bother making this, you know, a piece of the puzzle? And we always say yes, definitely, because if you think about it in terms of like your catalog's value, and if you are, you know, maybe you're not looking to sell today or get a valuation and you know, get like a loan against it or something, but in the event that you do want to find out, like, how much is my catalog actually worth? How much are these rights worth? How much, you know, could I potentially get to sell it? Very often we find people leave it out because there's no royalty obligation for them to pay out on it, so they don't even bring it into the picture. But then you aren't really getting the full picture of what your catalog is worth. So we always just advise people to keep that as part of the puzzle and make sure that that full value is in view and not something that you're going to have to try to like backfill in from years down the line, like, oh yeah, we have to bring that in now and sort of do some retroactive royalty accounting. You can just do it from the jump and you know, mark it as something that doesn't get paid out on, but is part of your, you know, your own catalog's value nonetheless.
And one tip I would give you is, good thing is you have options. Bad thing is everybody wants a piece of your money. So do your research. You're gonna hear lots of marketing. Just, you have options, but again, like, I've seen people paying very high commission rates for people that don't really represent them. Do your homework, if anything.
Yeah, and I'd like to add also that the majors try or intend to try that they are collecting on your behalf and will administer your part through to you if you have any license agreements. But in neighboring rights, you have the possibility to claim your own percentage at source in each territory. So if you have like a 50-50 split for specific countries with a major or with another licensed partner, both parties can claim their own shares. And historically, the majors always had that sort of policy that they would claim 100%, but nowadays, indies are definitely capable to claim their own part as well.
That's all. We thought it was going to take us 45 minutes to talk about all that. So we definitely have time for questions. So any questions?
It really depends on the territory.
Yeah, so it's a good, very good question. There's it's different in each country. When you look at, for example, in the Netherlands, you have the featuring performer. Everybody has to claim their own share. You cannot give splits away through LODs. You have to claim yourself, and there's like a standard percentage assigned to the non-featuring share. Of course, this depends how many non-featuring performers there are on the recording. But for example, in the Netherlands, a non-featuring performer can get paid for each instrument that he added to the recording. So if you played, for example, the bass guitar and drums and some programming, you get 3 points. But if you only played the violin, you get 1 point. So it's very important that you register that in that way in the Netherlands. But in other territories, there are completely different rules. So each territory has to be treated customized. In some countries, also the creative producer is entitled to royalties, but most territories don't acknowledge the creative producer as an entity that is entitled to neighboring rights. What I always advise is that if you somewhere register the credits for the recording, and the creative producer should be receiving some royalties. Make sure that it's credited as MIDI or programming or keys, because those are recognized as instruments, but creative production is not. And that can make a huge difference if it's a big hit around the world. Yeah, if you can. Yeah, for sure. Programming or MIDI or keys.
Or clapping.
Sort of, that's clapping.
Making a sound, basically.
Yeah, but yeah, we've had some really big situations where if this would have been organized well from the beginning, there would have been a completely different financial picture for the creative producer involved.
But also, as Eric said, it completely varies by territory. Like you can have the UK or Germany where you have one society that handles everything, labels, non-featured, featured. Or on the other side, you have France, who they have 4 societies. They have one for majors, one for indies, one for non-featured, one for featured. Some include engineers in the feature, some don't. So go figure. Like every single territory is different.
Yeah, I got one too. I found this in my research. Australia pays the label and artist share for non-Australian artists to the label, but for Australian artists, it's just the label share. And then Israel is the inverse of that. So if anybody followed that, congratulations, you're a genius. But it's extremely complicated. And then to think about that from a royalty accounting perspective, like if you're the label and you are getting the artist share, because that's how Australia does it, you're going to have to sort that out in the royalty accounting and pay through that share to the artist, or at least make it, part of the recoupable picture. Whereas, your SoundExchange from the States, it's already pre-split. You don't have to do anything with that. So there's a lot to think about and know about when you're going out and collecting this money. It's definitely worth going out and doing it. And, you can program software to sort it out the right way. Once you know what to do, you can just program it once, and then you don't really have to think about it again. But there is a lot to know about once you do collect it, based on like how every individual territory does it. And like, we always try to help people through it, but it's definitely a lot, and it's something that we could definitely use a lot of standardization across the industry. That's something that we've been kind of trying to push out there. There's no data standards, or obviously like how these royalties get treated from one country to the next. It's very, I don't know, governmental might be the right word for it. So it doesn't really seem likely to change. So we might as well kind of get used to it and learn as much about it as we can, and try to get as much of that money for ourselves and our artists as we can.
And there are data standards like DDEX, but then people don't use them. But
well, that's on the input though. On the output,
it works both ways. But then very little CMOs overseas have the capabilities. So
they should use those capabilities.
What's also relevant, I think, is that in each territory, other types of music are qualifying or not. So, for example, library music is not qualifying in a number of territories, but does qualify in other territories. Production music as well. Music used in commercials, like television commercials or advertisements, is not being collected for in a number of territories, but is collected for in other territories. And when you are, for example, a label based in the US or in the UK, you are, for example, not used to specific types of music that are being paid for. If you register it in, for example, in PPL in the UK, and you have a television a production catalog with music used in a TV series, in the UK they don't collect for that, for neighboring rights. But this also means that if they represent you outside of the UK, they will not be collecting those royalties for you outside of their territory. So in that case, you have to make sure that you register that part of your catalog in those territories yourself.
So for publishing royalties, if a label is registering the content, but the artist does not have a PRO IPI, for example, what happens to this side of the royalties, whether you're publishing royalties? Are they on hold until they register, or
So,
That's, I believe, yeah, they get put on hold, but also that's a completely different side of things. Unfortunately, that's publishing side.
Publishing is completely separate from the label.
From neighboring rights.
So hopefully you didn't sign to a major label and they said, we want your publishing too, because that's bad sometimes. But it's incumbent on the writer to register with PRO, ASCAP, BMI, et cetera. And it's not up to the label. The neighboring rights thing is different. Some labels, as we're talking about, do own or are granted the rights to the neighboring right. So they're different stories. If you want to talk about publishing, I'll talk to you about publishing later.
But virtually every single one of the big societies would hold on the artist royalties, waiting for them to register, and they also spend time and money and resources looking for those artists and making sure that they get registered. So it's always held for a number of years. Any more questions?
So what are the names of the companies like SoundExchange and all the other territories that need to be directly?
So we are currently collecting from more than 80 different individual societies, and I'm happy to let you know which ones they are, but maybe that's not for now. I would say there are approximately, because there's also overlap, like SoundExchange, there are joint societies who do performer rights and the rights owner side. But there are like 80 individual societies where you should be registering for both performer and label. But if you only register your label catalog, there are approximately 50 countries which have a society in place that actually pays something. There are also a number of territories where there's a society, but their admin fee is higher than their collections. So far there's no money to be expected, but those are like the starting markets.
And then what local, what domestic U.S. like distribution companies would do any of that? Any one of them?
So most of them promise that they do it. I think a lot of distribution companies have underestimated the complications on the neighboring rights side because there's no standardization, so there's still a lot of manual work to be done if you want to register it properly. But we're seeing that there's been, like from the Orchard to Believe Digital to TuneCore, we're seeing InGrooves, we're seeing a lot of companies that had these like tick the box models. When you had your distribution deal, you could also do your neighboring rights through them. But I think it's sort of backfiring now because they're getting a lot of disputes because they signed up a lot of rights that actually were not from companies that were not entitled to collect neighboring rights. And so they have been polluting the systems around the world for a long time, but nowadays we're not seeing that so much anymore.
So one thing to make sure that it's clear, it is very rare that one label goes and registers individually with all these CMOs overseas. You typically go to one, give them a worldwide mandate, and you're gonna get paid faster, pay less taxes, and have one consolidated reporting that you can then use. If you go to all of those, you can do it, but good luck.
Yeah, I've never seen it done.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, how often does the distribution contract allow you to carve off neighboring rights and then go find a company that will do all your neighboring rights?
Always. I mean, the distribution channel doesn't typically include it. As of a few years ago, they did sort of try to fold it in a lot of cases, but yeah, a lot of them are walking that back now. So it's definitely not like the default. There's another question.
In the U.S., the rights owner has to register first before the artist. And their side, is that pretty universal around the world?
No, in most countries you have to claim your own share. In the UK, you have to register it as a rights owner as well. But no, it's
That is not how it works in SoundExchange. You can have, as an artist, you can go and claim your artist share and get paid your artist share, and it's independent of the rights owner's share.
Yeah, it's only in the UK where the artist cannot claim its rights until the label has registered the song in PPL's database. But in the rest of the world, it's just separate processes.
Yeah, other territories license the music. So the rights owner has to submit the content first. The CMO licenses the music, and then those recordings are eligible for neighboring rights. In the US, being a statutory license, we don't have to license. every single recording that gets streamed is eligible for neighboring rights. So as an artist, you claim your recording, and we pay you. Any more questions?
What happens if someone else went and claimed your rights?
That happens. That triggers a conflict. And then it goes through different CMOs do it differently. How we do it at SoundExchange, we ask both parties first, hey, are you sure you intended to claim this? You'd be surprised how many times they say, oops. And if they said, oops, that's fine. We pay whoever needs to be paid. If both maintain the claim, they go ahead and we put the money on hold and we ask them to resolve the conflict, and they need to agree on who owns it. And then whoever owns it and whoever wins the conflict, so to speak, gets paid going forward.
Does SoundExchange or any other organizations, do they ever get money back in the case of a like, oops, we shouldn't have claimed that and we did collect a bunch of money for it? Do you ever try to claw that back?
It depends. Different people do it differently. Sometimes we put people on the negative, so to speak, and they owe us money and they need to earn it back. If it's too much, we sometimes do ask for the money back. Other CMOs don't do adjustments that flow from the past. So by definition, you cannot be in the red. So it varies. How we do it, we try to make sure that we don't ask for the money back. So,
Yeah.
But it depends on the amounts and depends on the workflows.
But every CMO has an expiration period. So if you have, let's say, if somebody has claimed your rights incorrectly for the past 5 years, and you start counterclaiming them, and you win that dispute, it depends in the territory. In some territories, they have like an expiration period of 3 years, and that will mean that the past 3 years that have been incorrectly paid to that other party will be recalculated and will be paid out to you by the society. And the society, the other party will get a negative balance within the society. But for the first 2 years that fall outside of the expiration period, it's something that you have to find a settlement for with the third party that has been claiming incorrectly. And each territory has their own expiration rules. Most of them have at least 3 years. Some have like 5, 6, or even 7 years of expiration.
Last question.
I'm curious, what's the percentage of value of neighboring rights? Kind of, is there a percentage, a standard as opposed to like Spotify streaming income? Like you guys work in business, would you think that you're going to get 5-10% total income from neighboring versus higher than lower?
Yeah, you mean in the total like recorded income pie? It's a good question. I don't know. What do you think, Aline? Our catalogs, we do like 200 different labels, or we do publishing as well, so they're not all labels. But I don't know, 5%, 10%.
So the neighboring rights market, I think we said it earlier, it's valued at $2.6 billion a year.
Right.
So it depends on how big of an artist you are. If you're a big artist, you're gonna see neighboring rights in the 2 digits.
Yeah, and you can weigh that against the the total recorded music market and just do some quick math to get the like overall percentage. But it would vary quite a bit depending on how much a particular artist in your catalog is played overseas and in one country versus another, and depending on their particular rules. But yeah, I feel like 5% is probably a.
And also what we've seen in the past is that there is no correlation between how the music gets streamed in the US versus how it gets streamed overseas. And you can be huge in the US and make nothing overseas. And also the other way around, which is always surprising. Bands that don't really make that much here, and they're huge in Germany.
Big in Japan.
Yeah. Yep.
I just want to say thank you. You guys did a really good job of making one of the most complicated things there is. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think we have time for more questions.
Yeah, that's it. We gotta.
Thank you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.